so for the past 20 years, I have studied the art of leadership and success. For some reason, the topic has always fascinated me. I was always curious about who was deemed to be a leader. What were the skills and qualities that they possessed, and where did they learn them? How did they dress? How did they speak? How did they engage with others? What exactly was their superpower? Now, I'm guessing I've been fascinated with this topic because I grew up really poor. And unfortunately, words like leadership and success were not necessarily words that were used to describe my community or people like me. The mission was simple: make sure that there was food on the table and that the lights didn't get cut off. Right? Poverty was something that people desperately tried to escape and overcome. Right? And so when I was in school, many well-intentioned adults told me that if I worked hard, if I stayed in school, that perhaps one day I too could be successful and escape the poverty that surrounded us. Now I'm going to come back to my story, but what I will tell you is that I followed the advice of those adults. I went on to college to get my MBA, and I consider myself to be successful, but I'm still obsessed with this topic. Right? So much so that I've dedicated the majority of my career to helping other young people who grew up poor like me to find that success that those well-intentioned adults talked to me about so long ago. And what I found after working with hundreds of young people is that they have a special gift. These young people from really challenging backgrounds possess what I call superpowers. But unfortunately, those superpowers go untapped because of the way we look at those in poverty. These young people have what I call invisible talent. So because of the work that I do, I've had an opportunity to connect with people from all walks of life. And for those who have considered themselves to be successful, many of them attribute to their success poverty. They say that poverty served as a powerful incubator for them to sharpen and develop their leadership skills, the very things that made them successful. And so as I've studied hundreds of adults, worked with hundreds of young people, and I reflect on my own story, I can't help but think, what if poverty were something that we didn't desperately try to escape and overcome, but instead was something that we saw as a superpower that could change the world? Because I honestly think that it is. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm in no way trying to romanticize poverty. I am very clear that there have been some social policies put in place, from Jim Crow laws to some newly proposed immigration laws, that disproportionately impact certain populations. Right? And if I can be honest, poverty is the reason why we're seeing record levels of violence here in the city of Chicago. Right? Just last year, homicides spiked to 762. That's more than New York and LA combined. Right? So most of these happen in some of the poorest, most under-resourced neighborhoods. So my point is that poverty alone in isolation can be very tragic. But I am an eternal optimist. And I also happen to be a Beyonce fan, right? And so I have to think, what if we made lemonade out of the lemons that is poverty? I insert laughter went there in my remarks, so that's where you're supposed to laugh. So I want to tell you about a student, Nia, who's done just that. She made lemonade out of lemons. We were having lunch about last year this time, and she confided in me that she was homeless. She was finishing up her senior year, and she shared that she had to sleep on the couch of a different friend almost every week, and that some weeks she had to travel almost 2 hours to and from school. All the while she persisted. She was applying to college and participating in the program that I have the privilege of running, Chicago Scholars. She applied to 12 different schools, got accepted to most of them, including her dream school. But when all the financial aid calculations were said and done, she would still owe $25,000. Right? Nia tapped into her superpowers. She found the $25,000, I don't know how, to enroll in her dream school. And fast forward, Nia completed her first year with a 3.75 GPA. She already has an internship lined up at a prestigious accounting firm. right? Her life has been changed as a result of her tapping into those superpowers. Now, when I saw her navigate these really challenging situations, I couldn't help but think that she was demonstrating some of the competencies and skills that I look for in my most senior leaders on my team, right? And actually, if you look at any future jobs report that lists the skills that will be required of 21st century leaders, Nia demonstrated them all. Impressive. Now, her story is remarkable, no doubt about it, but her story is not unique. I get to hear hundreds of stories of young people like this who persist. They apply to Chicago Scholars hoping to find that success. And what I know for sure after meeting these young people is that when you have to decide where you're going to sleep each night, when you have to decide which route to take on the way to school to avoid any challenges along the way, and when you have to figure out how to stretch $7 until mom's next payday, you get to be really creative. You get to be skilled at decision making, and you get to refine your critical thinking skills. These are the superpowers that I'm talking about. And so like Nia, I had to tap into my superpowers early on. So I was born right here in Chicago to teen parents in a housing project that no longer exists. And while we escaped the projects, I had a chance to come back on a regular occasion. And one of the places that I learned some of these superpowers was from my frequent visits from a woman that we affectionately called the Candy Lady. Right? Every time I came to the projects, I had to visit. She learned, actually, the art of buying low, selling high, and meeting a growing demand. I had to get my fix of all the things, all the candies that I could no longer get in my small town, from Chico Sticks, Icy Cups, Lemon Heads. If you're from Chicago, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? But she had to demonstrate skills like negotiation, communication skills, people skills, right? And I learned all of that from the Candy Lady. I didn't have the words as an 8-year-old, the skills that I saw demonstrated, but I was developing my superpowers, and I learned that right there. So I know my family was working desperately to get us out of the projects to escape poverty, but I had no clue that in that moment, the skills that I was learning would allow me to move from the projects to running Chicago Scholars. The question, right, that I will ask again is, what if poverty were not something that we tried desperately to escape and overcome, but instead something that we saw as a superpower? Right? The real question, though, is how do you take the invisible talent that exists inside of those who live in poverty, and how do you turn that into a superpower? How do you activate that? I think the answer is simple. And that simple answer is belief, right? Belief in yourself, someone believing in you, and then you believing in something bigger than yourself, right? Every time I get a chance to meet with a young person, I am making sure that they believe strongly in themselves. I operate as their poverty translator. I listen to their stories, and I try to articulate and give them the words that describe the invisible talent that I see existing inside of them. I try to make sure that they believe that what they see on the nightly news is not who they are. It is something that is personal to me because I struggled so much with doubt as a young person, even though I had my very own superpowers. And I don't know if I ever would have developed that self-belief had it not been for someone believing in me. I think everybody in this room, no matter how we grew up, can relate to having doubt or feeling insecure about certain things, right? And it probably took someone to tell us or remind us of our talent, our power, our greatness. Maybe it was a parent, a friend, or a mentor. I had my share of them all, and I'll never forget one of the first was Mrs. Brown. I participated in a program very similar to Chicago Scholars. It was a program that helped individuals like myself get in to become the first to go to college. And I'll never forget, Miss Brown pulled me aside one day, and she told me very simply that I was smart, right? She told me that I was talented and that I could get to college. Now, her words were so simple, and for all I know, she could have been reading from a manual and around how do you talk to little black kids who live in poverty. I don't know, but her words changed my life. If you never heard those words, they can change your life, and that's exactly what it did for me. If Miss Brown thought that I could be successful, that I could go on to college, I was not going to let her down. And as a result of her mentorship and her belief in me, I became the first in my family to graduate high school and to go on to college. And from then until now, on every step of my leadership journey, I've had many, many others. Mr. Smith, Mr. Potts, Miss Petrie, Susan, Chastity, Tim, so many others. They became my poverty translators. They helped me to understand my own invisible talent and turn that into my superpower. And in the moment that it got really hard and I wanted to quit, they reminded me of the bigger picture. They reminded me of my why. I had to remember what God's purpose was for my life, what my hard work could mean for my family, for my unborn children, for my community, my country, my people. Right? Belief was the activator, right? That is my point. When I think about the hundreds of adults that I've studied throughout the years, when I think about the young people that I get to serve at Chicago Scholars, when I think about my own story, belief has been the common denominator. And so as we contemplate poverty as a superpower and tapping into the invisible talents that live inside all of us, I want to leave you with 3 questions. What could happen when invisible talent meets up with belief? Honestly, I think it is a superpower that could change the world. And there are examples of it all around us. Nia's story is just one example of the many, many young people with invisible talent who are beating the odds every day. The second question is, what if we could rethink leadership? What if we could unlearn the biases that we have towards people in poverty? What if we could blow up the traditional rubrics that we use to assess leadership and success and who gets to have it? What if we truly did believe that poverty was a superpower? Right? If we did, something as random as the ACT would not be the ticket for entry on a college campus like this. And my last and probably the most important question is, what role do you play? What can you do? And again, the answer is simple. That is, believe. If you happen to be the person who has a history of humble beginnings, I want you to embrace it. Rather than trying to escape and overcome it like we did, remember that with that poverty that you inherited comes with it qualities like creativity, resilience, passion. Right? If you don't have poverty as part of your identity, the next time you hear the words urban, at risk, low income, I want you to become a poverty translator and replace those words with talented, scholarly, hardworking. Right? And if you happen to be privileged enough to work with or know someone who has that history of humble beginnings, who identifies as under-resourced or low income, I want you to remember everything that they had to overcome to be standing alongside you. I want you to motivate them, encourage them, help them to tap into those invisible talents that we know can turn into superpowers. I want you to believe, actually, that you have your own superpowers. If you will, I want you to believe that poverty can serve as the incubator, as the training ground to develop superpowers. And when activated appropriately, it has the potential to change the world. Thank you.